Good Woche. I spoke last Shabbos on Parshas Acharey-Kedoshim on the concept of whether shadim exist or not, and how to deal with when there is a contradiction in science between what we know today versus what has been known at the time, and specifically if the halacha is dependent on that specific knowledge. So I thought I would speak a little bit about it. It's quite controversial, but when I saw a video where Rav Usher Weisschlitter has given a beautiful explanation, I thought that I would put my wagon on his train and continue a little bit further how the way that he explains it in a way that I believe makes is my personal interpretation as well. So Achemos is a parsha that speaks about straight after when the two sons of Aharon passed away, were killed actually by Hashem with a fire. It's clear that the avera that they've done is that they brought Ketore Zoro and the Mizbeach. Ketore Zoro you're not allowed to bring. And it's clear also when you look at the mitzvahs that are all related to how to deal with what we call today shadim, what Chaza'l call shadim. These are the seirim, the mazikim that we see a lot in Chaza'l, because the Ketores itself, the Ketores actually, the focus of the Ketores seems to be to actually chase away the shadim. As we see also when there was a Magefo in Klal Yisrael, then Moshe Rabbeinu sends Aharon to go around with the Ketores in order for the Magefo to stop. So it's quite a stopping of the dark forces. This is what the Ketores is all about. And since the two sons of Aharon try to add more Ketores in order to probably remove the shadim in their time, the Torah started to give all kinds of haluchas that are clearly related to that subject. So, for example, when the Torah says that straight after the story that the Torah gave us the mitzvah of Yom Kippur, the mitzvah of Yom Kippur, also the Avodas Yom Kippurim is clearly also focused on one of the focuses clearly is in this Ir Lazozel, where as if the Torah is saying, look, I don't want you to start doing things for the shadim. I want you to be tumim tiyem Hashem Elokecho, but I know that you have this need and this want to actually do that. So I will give it to you, but just once a year, and it's going to be in a controlled way. So you'll be able to bring a seir. The seir is to the azozel, but only once a year in a controlled way with the kohanim, etc. While also once a year will be Lashem. Also, the aver, of course, the lois say not to shecht the korban outside of the Beis Hamikdash. It says mefurish that the Torah says, why don't we do it? Hashem wants us to bring a korban outside of the Beis Hamikdash. It says that the posuk zayin v'lo yizbechu oid zivchehem laseirim oid. In other words, this is clear. The seirim is actually Rashi explains that these are to shadim. So it's clearly again you see here the element of the shadim. Another mitzvah in this week's parsha is Kisui Adam. The Kisui Adam is also poshet for me personally is an element of how to reduce the avodah for the shadim. We see, for example, the Ramban explains Adam that what is the lav from Adam. He explains that the poshet pshat. Of course, Chaza'l give us a whole bunch of loisases. That's why it's also considered the lav shebichlolois. But the Ramban gives a poshet pshat, and he says Adam means that they used to do that they used to make a shchita on a behemoth, and then the blood comes out, and they try to contain the blood on a specific place, and they used to look around, and then when the shade came, then they used to ask the shade all kind of questions. Now, the Ramban does not explain why would they come to the blood, but then I've seen last week one of the sources that explain that the shadim, since they were only created with ruach and eish, only two of the four material that the world exists, and therefore ruach and eish, since they have this body that we can't see, but they exist and they have to eat as well, and since they have a very fine body, they cannot eat a lot of material, and the only thing that they can eat is blood. And therefore, when they see blood, when somebody leaves out fresh blood, of course, the shadim are coming. And from that moment onwards, when you can see them eating, or somebody can feel that they're eating, then you can ask them questions. Normally, they can answer you what the future will bring. And so the Torah says, you're not allowed to do that. And in order for the Torah to make sure that you're not going to do that, then the Torah also obliged you to cover the blood with offer, so that actually it should be unedible anymore, or that you should not be able to look in it and things like that. So basically, it is again a mitzvah that is related to how to contain the need that we have in terms of interacting with shadim, with ruach ro, with dark forces, with kishuv and talisman and all these kameas, etc. And so that is how the Torah is trying to keep us under control, that type of need apparently that we have, and that the Torah does not want. Now the question, of course, is it real? Do they really exist? And then therefore the Torah doesn't want us to do it, or they don't really exist in reality. And this is the opposition of the Rambam. The Rambam in Perush HaMishnah is on Avodah Zorah, Perek Dalet, on I think also Mishnah Dalet, I think, he actually, Mishnah Hey, he actually says that the philosophers of perfection, they don't believe in all those things. And even though that a lot of the Atki Toivdim Hasidim Mibnei Doseinu, even our very big Gedolim Chachom from our own religion, they believe in those things. Choshim She'dbor Mamitim Eller Shehem Asurim Mitzad HaTorah, that be'etzem they work, Kishuv magic works, but they are not allowed to. Einum Yoidim, but he says the Rambam, but they don't know Shehem Dvorim Betelim Kuzovim. In other words, they are rubbish, they are not real, and therefore, like you're not allowed to lie and to do stupid things. The Torah wants you to remove yourself from sheker. So all these things are sheker, are kozov, are betvorim betelim, and therefore one should not be busy with that. The Torah wants to protect us from being too much in superstitions and things like that don't have any value and any real value in the world. They are simply part of our imagination. The son of the Rambam, I think, calls it divrei chaloimes. I don't know if he means it really in a negative way, but in any case, they can also mean the parabolic way, that whenever we speak about these things, it's not really that they are really existing. Inasmuch, then the Rambam's opinion in his Perush HaMishnah is that his opinion also in some little bit has managed to get to the Shulchan Aruch. So the Beis Yosef wrote in his own Shulchan Aruch, he wrote down in Siman Kuf Ayin Tes, Yoreder, Seif Vov. So there he speaks about Misha Noshcho Yaakov, Mutar Lilchosh Olov. So when a person was bitten by an akrab, then he's allowed to be loichesh. Loichesh meaning that he says psukim, or he speaks to the makkah. Va'afilo b'Shabbos, even on Shabbos. Va'af al pi says Shulchan Aruch, va'af al pi shenad over mo'il klum. Even though that these are all rubbish, they won't help anything to the makkah. Hoilu mesukenhu, because he is at danger. This person is at the danger. Itiru kedosh lititorev date olov. So that the Chaza'l were matir in order for him not to become stressed. Too much stress, which can harm him even further, since he's already in a dangerous situation. So it's a very interesting halacha here. The halacha itself is okay, that is already part of the poskim, that is not a problem, but that the Shulchan Aruch felt that he needed to add this sentence, so he really wanted to explain that he agrees with the Rambam that those things are not helping at all, they are not real. The Biur Agro on the spot, on that particular Shulchan Aruch, Beis Yosef Mechaber, he says clearly that this is based on the Rambam, and indeed in the Perush HaMishnah is the Perek Dalet Avodas Kochovim, Aval Kol HaBoim Achro. But everybody, all the Rishonim that came after the Rambam, Cholkolov have already disagreed with him. A lot of kind of lachash were told in the Gemara that apparently are helping. And who nimshar philosophy. So then he goes back to the Rambam and he says that the reason why the Rambam came to that conclusion is because he actually appreciated very much the philosophy. ולכן כוסף שכשופים ושמוס ולחשים ושדים וקומאוס הכל הוא שקר. All these things that I just mentioned are all שקר, אבל כבר העיקו אויסון על קודקודוי, but a lot of them have already hit on the head of the Rambam, שהרי מוצאים הרבה מעשיות בגמורה על פי שמוס וכשופים. So basically there is a lot of things that have been already mentioned in the Gemara. The Gemara mentions stories and all kind of tricks, how to see the shadim and what type of shadim and how you can deal with them and what you should do, what you should not do, etc., etc. And also Mases Shahoyu, also real stories that happened in the Gemara. And therefore it's clear, he says, the Vilna Gaon, that the Rambam is wrong by claiming that it does not exist. And therefore he says, the philosophia, Hitzoy beroi lokachas lefarish. Can't read this anymore, but that it is the philosophy that actually pushed him in order to go away from what the Gemara says. So he says that it is because of the philosophy that the Rambam was pushed not to learn like the Gemara, like the Poshet Pshat, that these really exist. Now, of course, the question is, we don't see today any dark magic. We don't see today any shading. Nobody that I know has told me that he saw some black magic or things that happened and that worked or didn't work. And so there's already a lot written about that subject. How come that we don't see today shadim and there is no black magic? And so Bizman Hazeh says, the Ben Yehuda, בזמן הזה נחלש כוח הסטרא אחרא ונסמרתו אלו, גם כן, שנסבטל נזק של הזוקס מפני כי הסטרא אחרא נחלש כוחו. In other words, today a person is allowed to be oisik bezugos, with double, with pairs, and he's also allowed to do all kinds of things, because all the things when Chaza'l are saying that these are dangerous because of these ruach that are being created by doing these things, or to put yourself in a danger. Actually, it's not anymore today, and because the sitr achar generically has decreased. Why they have decreased, that's another question, but it's clear that there have been a decrease of the sitr achar, and hence we are allowed to, we don't have to take it into consideration. Also, Rabbi Notam in Tosis in Yumud of Ein Zayin says, so again, the same concept that basically the ruach and the zugos and the shadim are not existent anymore today. In any case, Rabbi Notam says bechol malchios, in all the elu malchios in those countries that we are living, maybe in Eretz Yisrael or in Bovel, they were still there, but in any case, where we are in Europe, they don't exist. What I liked very much is the Kotzker. The Kotzker in Emes V'Emunah also writes down in order to explain why today we are not very much busy with shadim and things like that. So he says that after when the Rambam already wrote down and described us that they don't exist, then Gamba Shumayim Posku Hochi, then also in heaven they agreed with the Rambam, Ulechen Achshav Ein Benitzo. So it is kind of a kimu v'kiblu, kimu lemato, mashe kimu lemato, or something in the same context, that basically whatever is paskent in this world is also then paskent in the upper world. So you see here a big machlokes, whether or not the shadim exist and how to deal with that. There is, of course, there are some who want to say that, and I don't think that it needs a lot of proof, but Chaza'l give us a lot of refuahs, a lot of medicine that can be done for all kinds of diseases. And it's clear that nobody today would not take any antibiotics and the proper medicine and making the operation and would base themselves on what Chaza'l are telling us to do. It's clear that the medicational system of Chaza'l are not valid for us. And therefore, when a person is not well, he should go to see a doctor. There's no rov that would pass to him, no, you should first look in the Gemara, maybe there is a refuah for you in the Gemara, don't go and see a doctor. No, a person has to go and see a doctor, and therefore it is something very important that we don't follow what the Chachamim are saying about this refuah, but we go to doctors who are the mumchim of that refuah. So the Rambam clearly has quite a shocking opinion about that, because he says that all the chokhmas that the Talmud is bringing is hoyo bizmanim ahem chaseros. So when Chaza'l created their knowledge, they shared with us their knowledge on physics, on biology, on medicine, and things like that. He says that the knowledge and the chokhmah were chaseros were quite limited. So when they explained biology and physics, they did not speak with what we can call today Ruach HaKodesh or Divrei Neviim or Kabbalah min Hashmuah that we have received, but they only speak about the things that existed and were known in their time. That they are actually what they understood in their time. Or he says it could also be that the Chachomim of the Gemara also maybe there were also things that they didn't know themselves, and so they listened to what the Chachomim from the Umas Olam were talking about that subject, and then they have incorporated that in their knowledge that they shared with us through the Gemara. So, but at the end of the day, he says, but if a person comes to the conclusion that something is true and only true and clearly true, and he has made all the analysis and he comes to a clear 100% Bavado's conclusion, what is true according to him, this is clear that a person should look for the truth. And even though when you know that something is true, but then, of course, Chaza'l are saying something else, then the question, and that is a philosophical question, does a person need to actually change his mind and kind of corrupt his mind? And although that is logic and everything that he knows about the subject is clear, bevado is 100% that it is true, does he have to kind of change and bend his mind and say, no, I'm not going to believe myself, I'm going to believe the Chachomim when it comes to that subject, which has to do with biology or physics or not. And so the Rambam says clearly that a person should always look and strive for the truth, for the emes, and if it is clear that the emes, what we know today is emes, then a person should follow that. Although that the Chachomim said opposite, they didn't say the same thing, but he says that the Chachomim of that time only was based on the Chochmah, on this subject that existed at that time. If they would have said it al pi Kabbalah, al pi Nevuah, al pi Ruach HaKodesh, then it's something else. But he says those subjects are not written, they were not given to us, that it is something that came straight from heaven in the eyes and in the mind of the Chachomim. Similar, I think, is also, the Rambam goes here also similar to his opinion about what is going to happen when Moshiach will come. There also the Rambam writes that everything that the Chaza'l are describing, they are all logic that they came with their own analysis of a text. They looked in the Nevi'im, and then this is how they translated the Nevi'im. But actually, nothing of these things that will happen that were described by the Chaza'l came from a specific Nevuah, or they had a Kabbalah. And so therefore, we don't know what is going to happen. The only thing what Chaza'l did is they looked at the Psukim and they deducted ideas that could have happened. But he says, basically, we don't know. It is only theories and hypotheses. So it's a very strong opinion of the Rambam that only the halachas is clear that we have to follow from the Chachomim. When it comes to biology, physics, and astronomy and things like that, then you have to look for the truth. And the truth, if you find it in Chachomim, that's fantastic. And if not, then you have to continue searching for your own truth and making sure that you keep the truth, because the truth is still the most important element. And the she'ifa that a person has to come is to find the truth, and this is the Das Hashem. But then the Rambam clearly also takes a position, which everybody would ask, yeah, but what happens if nature changes, and then what about the Halucha? So the Rambam says that v'chein, so in the Hilchos Shchita, Perik Yud Halucha Yud Gimel, he says v'chein elu shemonu v'omru shein treifo. So whenever we have the Chai treifos, Yud Ches treifos, afal pi sheyire v'dach karofu shebiyodenu shemitzos eino memisim, ve'efshar shetechai Yosef, I don't know, it's not printed here anymore. Shenemal pi ator Hashem. Basically, what the Rambam says that even though we would see today that these treifers are not treifers, but they are actually, those animals can live longer than 18 months, they are still treifers, and they would be chayv malchus if somebody would eat them. So although that the reality is not how the Chaza'l has described them, and therefore normally you would assume that the din, the halacha, should change as well, the Rambam says very clearly the halacha is how the Chaza'l have determined. And that's something that needs an explanation, and that's what we will see in the name of the Chazon Ish, and then Rabbi Shavais, and then I will give my own explanation how to do that, how to explain that. So this is the view of the Rambam. The Chachomim did not know everything. They knew everything that has to do with the mitzvahs, has to do with the halachas, and the limud of the Torah, things like that. But when it comes to science, not necessarily they knew whatever had to be known at that time. And basically, even in the time of the Rambam, even what the Rambam writes, we know today that is not exactly how he describes them, especially when it comes to the Gilgulim and the Mazulos and things like that. We do know that there is other opinions today on the structure, how the world is how the astronomy is currently actually activating in its own mind. There is a famous Rashba, which goes from one extreme. So the Rambam holds that they didn't know, and the Rashba says that they knew everything. The Rashba was asked a very interesting shaila. Somebody asked him that he had a behemoth, he was a farmer, he had a behemoth, and the behemoth had a mum, not a mum, a treifo, clay treifo, according to the halacha, the reise, the treifo. And normally, a treifo, there's a chazukah, a treifo cannot live longer than 12 months. And what happened is that this behemoth with a treifo actually lived longer than 12 months. Since he found a treifo, and till now, it's much longer than 12 months. It might even be 2 years, and the behemoth is still alive. And so here there are two questions, basically, that the Rashba is dealing with. The first one is, does it mean that the Chachomim were wrong? That's the one question, that because we see that this is not a treifo. In other words, should we completely remove that one from the list of the treifos, since we found one that actually lives more than 12 months? And the second question is, even if you do not want to remove it, can you at least say that this particular behemoth, since he lives longer than 12 months, he's already 2 years, for example, can you eat it? Is it kosher to be eaten, even though that he has the simon of treifo? And so he's dealing a lot with that subject, and he brings a lot of proofs against the Rabbonim that in his time that wanted to say that the person should be allowed to eat it. And he actually says clearly that it's not Chaza'l have given us a list of treifos, whether the doctors find or not, we don't care. We believe in Chaza'l, and Chaza'l said that the chazukah, that the behemoth will die within 12 months. In other words, it's not just that the majority of behemoths do not live longer than 12 months, but actually that all of them, there's a chazukah that none of them will live longer than 12 months, because if it would be only a majority of them, in that case, if this particular behemoth lived longer than 12 months, we could say that he belongs to the minority and therefore should not be a trefe. So he says there is no such a concept. There is clearly that there is no behemoth that can live longer. And so if you want to ask me, how can you find out that there is, how can you see in your own field that you have there a behemoth in your farm, you have a behemoth which lives longer than 12 months. So he says that it's not possible, and you have to believe that you miscalculated, you have not watched properly, you have not looked properly, maybe you have not been able to watch the behemoth all the time, maybe somebody exchanged the behemoth, it got exchanged by some reason or another. You never know. It's nearly impossible, he says, to have an edus that something exists already 12 months. For this, you need to really have your eyes on something for 12 months. Person cannot keep his eyes. He has to go to sleep. He has to go to a chassan, bar mitzvah, yom tov. He has to always busy, and you cannot have your eyes continuously on something for for the length of 12 months in order to be able to prove that it is it's still alive. So basically, he says, no, there is no such a thing. If Chaza'l say that the behemoth will not pass away, will not live longer than 12 months, then it will not live longer than 12 months. And we have to have emunas chachomim, and that is the way that it is. There is on the other side, there is something very interesting. There is also the Gemara that explains that killing and something that is alive on Shabbos is mamish a melocha. Nilas neshoma is one of the melochas, and therefore is chayav skila. And the Gemara says that whether it doesn't make a difference if you kill a little ant or you kill a big elephant, for example, it doesn't make a difference in the size and in the importance of the living creature. Whatever you kill is chayav skila on Shabbos. So the Gemara says that the kino, which is the lice are actually, if a person kills on Shabbos a lice, the Gemara wants to say that it is potur. But why is it potur? It's even mutter. Why? Because lice are not being born from a mother and a father, from a male and a female. They are born spontaneously out of the dirt of what lies on the human body, and the sweat and the dirt. And from this, spontaneously, there is a creation of life. This was the biological assumption about lice. Therefore, the Gemara says that you're allowed to actually kill a kino, and I think that is also how it is paskent in the Shulchan Aruch, that it is one of the things that you're allowed to kill because they don't have eggs, they're not born from a mother. They're spontaneously created. So there's a sefer called Pesach Enayim, and he was actually probably an early Achon or late of the Rishonim, and he says that somehow there is today that, of course, he says that the Chachmei Akadmoinim and Yevonim, Veroimim, all the Umes Acheros in that time of the Chaza'l, they had this theory as well, that there are certain creatures and living animals that can be created out of from dirt and from offer, but Avol Acharei HaChochom Redi V'Chareirov Min HaNisoyin U'Min HaChochma HaKivis Onu Yodim Avado She'ein Min Echot Ba'olam She'ein Nivro Min HaBeitza Or Min HaMetzius Acher She'Doim Eloi V'Loi Min HaNazuamo, and it cannot happen. So basically the signs in this time, the Pesach Enayim, were very clear, and this is also what we know today, is that there is no such a concept of animals being created and being suddenly popping up out of nothing, but everything has a start, and the starting is always an egg, or they come out of the stomach, but normally for tiny things it's always an egg, then a larva that becomes a larva, and the larva becomes what it has to become. And therefore he says then that it's not to be surprised, he says, Ein lahafli al zeh lefi shebiyomo in those times hanisoyin b'chokmas hatevel regiu l'shar emes k'mo shehem yomeinu. That's a very interesting thing, where he says that the knowledge that happened at the time, and also in the time of the Gemara, was not as advanced as it is as in his time, and therefore he believes that since the knowledge has changed, we know things that was not known before, and so what he says is, in other words, when a person has a kino, a lice, he is, according to him, not allowed to kill it because it could be a problem of skila, of Bechilul Shabbos Doraisa, although the Gemara says that you're allowed to. And on this, the Pachad Yitzchok from Rav Brill, he actually he writes down and he says, how can you say that? He does not agree to that psak din, and he writes down, he brings down that of course this is not to be taken, even you cannot even go lechumra if Chaza'l teach us that they are born from dirt, whatever it is, even though that we know today that it's not true, but since they were matir, the heter stands forever. And whatever we know today, okay, we know today, but how do we know that what we know today is right or not right? What we have is what Chaza'l teach us, and they said that it's mutter, and therefore it should remain mutter. Even lekulam, and that's where the big chiddush is as well. So it's a double chiddush, because here we see a very clear from very early poskim that are actually writing about when the biology changes, what do we do? So the Rashba already discusses that, but also when it can go even lekulam, where you can be matter be'etzem melucha doraisa based on a biology that has clearly been proven to be wrong. But since the halacha is like that, we keep the halacha as it is, or we even refute the biological proof. So we have here two opinions. One opinion is the Rambam clearly saying that the Chaza'l were based on knowledge that existed at that time, and since knowledge changes, so we have to assume that basically the Chacham could not know everything. And then you have the Rashba, on the other hand, that holds that clearly that the opposite, whatever the Chaza'l says, is the right knowledge, and therefore we should not even consider this, that things have changed, that the knowledge has changed, but we have to assume that Chaza'l were right, and it's mamish the raisa, and it's bein lekol and bein lechumra. And then we saw a very good example, a practical example today. Are you allowed to kill a lice on Shabbos or not? And the halacha is that you're allowed to kill, but there are some who want to say that since biological knowledge changed, then we should be not allowed to kill them anymore. So these are the two extreme viewpoints. There is one viewpoint which is a little bit in the middle, which is the Ba'al HaTosfos. The Ba'al HaTosfos, they ask a lot of times in the Shas questions on the biological facts of Chaza'l. So, for example, one of them is the Gemara says that the behemoth can only give birth after 3 years. Before 3 years, there is no possibility of a cow to give birth. The nafkamina will be that if, for example, a cow that is 3 years old and gives birth, then you can assume that it is a vadai bechor. Why? Because anyway, she could not give birth before that, and therefore it's really a peter rechem. Also, chamor, same thing. Chamor also not before 3 years old. And so it's more legabe the vadai bechor, or again, if you have to have a sofik bechor, you have to think maybe she had already a child before that. So Tosis asks, v'yesh litmoya, the homasa bechol yom, the poor bas shtei shonim yoledes. So we see clearly that you look out, go into a farm and ask them, and you'll see that it's not a problem. Even 2 years old, they can give birth already. And so how come that the Chaza'l say that only after 3 years old? So we see also in the biology things have changed. We see, for example, Chaza'l say that normally a cow has 2 lungs, and sometimes it has a third little lung, and apparently this third little lung exists in the old time. This little third little lung, which is called the Varde Enunise de Varde, they are actually existing the whole time. And all our cows have it, 100% of the cows have it. And so therefore it is something very interesting. So he says clearly that the what we call today Nishtanu Hateva. So Tosfos has this third option, which is Nishtanu Hateva. So while The Rambam says the science of the time was wrong. The Rashba says the sign of time was right, and we don't know. And even though we bring proof, we have to still negate these proofs and assume that the Chazal were right. Tosfos says no. Tosfos says in the time of Chazal they were right, but today they are not right because the nature has changed. The teva has changed. I always bring down women used to have a vest kovua. They used to see the menstruation on a particular day, always on the same day, in the morning, afternoon, whatever. They had the vest kovua because most of the shilas, 90% of the shilas, go in what happens if from a vest kovua a woman suddenly changes and sees something another day. What all the halachas. Today, we know that 99% of the cases, it's not a vest kovua, it's actually a vest she'eino kovua. To become a vest kovua is a very rare thing, and suddenly the husband and the wife have to start doing all kind of calculations, and it becomes complicated. So you see clearly that women used to have very clear, regulated, regular menstruations. Then today they have changed. So you do see changes clearly also even today in the last 50 or 70 years. There is a big change that happened. And so similarly, this is what Tosfos says. Tosfos says the whole time, many times also in Moed Katan, he says that v'shemo nishtanu, that maybe things have changed, that k'moy ha'rofuos sheb'shas she'eino toibes b'zman hazeh. So here Tosfos says something extremely, extremely important, which we discussed in the beginning of the shir, but that, of course, according to Tosfos, it is not just an obligation that we don't understand, but he clearly says that the refuahs that existed in the time of Chazal, that Chazal gave us, are not valid today. So he says, he repeated, they are not valid in the current times. So apparently, according to Tosfos, they were valid at the time of Chazal, but since we changed, there is a mutation, our body changes, whatever it is, and we change, and therefore these medications don't help anymore. So that's the viewpoint of the Tosfos, which is of course not the point of the Rambam, and we don't know how the Rashba would actually treat us. There is also the Chaza'l as well. The Chaza'l speaks about the Chazal that say that a child that is born before 9 months, after 6 months, but before 9 months, the Chazal say that he cannot live. He cannot live, and therefore he is considered a nefel. He's not really a human being that is alive. And so the shaila now is, of course, should we save this child when there is a danger for Shabbos? Should we mechal Shabbos in order to prolong his life or not? If he is a nefel, then his life is not considered a life. Therefore, normally we should not be mechal Shabbos. And of course, the Chaza'l holds that you have to be mechal Shabbos for such a child, because we master b'chol, he says he knows many people that he knows that are actually where they give birth early than 9 months and they still live, whether it's because the medication is better or what he brings down also Tosfos Svora, that the teva has changed. So this is something yesod, so it's the middle opinion, kind of a compromise, that yes, what Chazal said was right, and also what the science say today is right. It's contradicting each other, but because its nature has changed. So nishtane hatev. So we see the three opinions, extreme opinions, but it's a very important one. So the question is, what about the halacha today? So whatever happens, even if nishtane hateva, then the question is, what Tosfos does not mention, what do we do with the halachas? So if things have changed, then we need to actually think of whether the halacha will change as well. And this is something which Tosfos does not bring. So it's a very interesting thing that Rabbi Weiss wants to bring down from the Chaza'l, where he explains the Chaza'l the following. The Chaza'l brings down this particular problem. So why, if nishtana teva, then logically, then the halacha should change as well. You can say either you hold like the Rashbo, that there is no Nishtana Teva, but what we think that we see is wrong. But at some point, we come to a level that we cannot say this anymore. And so when there is Nishtana Teva, should the Halucha change with it, well, or not? And so what the Chaza'l explains is that there is a famous Gemara that explains that the world will exist 6,000 years, 2,000 years of Toyu, Toyu Goyu, 2,000 years of Torah, and 2,000 years of Moshiach. And so basically, the world, from the time that the Torah was given, it lasted 2,000 years from the Torah to actually come to a certain conclusion. And everything that was based on the Teva that existed at those times. So when the Teva at the time of Chaza'l was how we described it before, and then the Halucha will have been fixated, and these Halucha that have been fixated were forever. So it's kind of, there is a window of 2,000 years within which the Torah is being formed, kind of, the Halucha has been formed, and the end of the 2,000 years, whatever the Teva existed at that time, was fixated into Halucha, and even if the Teva will change later on, the Halucha never changed. So that's what the Chaza'l explains. He says that that the Torah, the Rebbeinu Shloim, that the Torah was given to the Yidden, and there will not be afterwards after the 2,000 years of Torah. The Torah is fixated, and there will not be a new Torah, basically. So this is a very interesting Chaza'l. והנה רואה צורך להיקובע בבייס ואלופים 2,000 בייס ו2,000 Torah. כדאמר רבי דזורה, that the Dine Trefes the Torah. So it took 2,000 years that they received in order to be koivea the haluchas of Trefes. ונצא לחומים לקבוע Trefes על פי רוח קודשום והשופע עליהם, according to the Ruach HaKodesh that they received at that time. And at that time, this is what was in the Teva, and so therefore this is also what the halucha that is going to be for us as well. So although the Teva changed, we are still going to keep the halucha as if there was the original Torah, because the Torah finished, the formation of the Torah finished after the 2,000 years, which is about, let's say, the Mishnah, or even the Gemara, because the Gemara is only a pirush on the Mishnah, as Rabbi Weiss explains. Now, Rabbi Weiss continues a little bit in the thinking process. So he says that for certain things, it's clear that a person can say nature has changed, like, for example, babies that are born before 9 months, they are still very much alive, not a problem. That whether a cow can give birth after 2 years instead of 3 years. So there are a lot of things that can be said to have been changed. There is mutation, self-selection, evolution, of course, if you want, because like somebody in the Shia said, that what Toysus is saying basically is that evolution exists, that there are certain biological facts that are changing over time, and that therefore it makes sense. This we can understand, but there are certain points that Chaza'l are saying that you can very difficult explain with Nishtana Teva, and two of them Rabbi Weiss very nicely gives. He gives one of them, which is about the tubes that is within the penis, whether or not there are two tubes or one tube, one for the semen and one for the urine, or both are going through the same tube, and Chaza'l end up with the conclusion that there is actually two tubes. Separate tubes for the semen and for the urine. Today we know that there is only one tube. And for him, for Rabbi Weiss, it's very difficult to say Nishtana Teva, because why would the Rebbeinu Shloim suddenly decide that for our generations it should be in one tube, and in the previous times, in the time of Chaza'l, it should have been in two tubes. Another element is, of course, the viewpoint of Chaza'l on the world. That according to Chaza'l, the world is flat, but there is a dome over the world, and probably behind the dome there is water. And so, and the sun goes actually from east to west in a circle, follows the dome kind of in a way, comes to the west. There he goes through a tunnel, which is called the Bein HaShmoshes, and then he goes back up, but we don't see it because that's why it's night, but because it's behind the dome, and therefore he goes back up, all the way back to the east, takes another 72 minutes to get to his back trajectory of the inside part, and then he goes back up, and this is what he does the whole time. So basically, but the world is flat, and today we know that the world is round. Now, to say Nishtane Ateva would mean that Rabbeinu Shlomo one day decided that this flat system, the flat world, he started to blow in it, and it became a balloon, became a ball. He says, and I understand him, he says it's very difficult to actually assume that, because there's no reason why. Why would the Rabbeinu Shlomo first create something which is flat and then put it into something which is a ball? So it's clear that the knowledge of the time in Chaza'l were actually not as we know it today. And so what he wants to say, he wants to use the chidush of the Chazon Ish that says that there were 2,000 years of Torah, and at the end of the 2,000 years, it's when the Torah got fixated. But he wants to say that it was fixated it was Rabbeinu Shlomo said that it's going to be fixated based on the knowledge that existed at that time, not based on the teva, but based on the knowledge. Whatever Chazal knew at that time, even though that we know today that it is not a normal explanation, or even let's say that they were wrong, because like the Rambam explains, so he uses a bit the Rambam's opinion that Chazal did not know everything when it comes to biology and physics and astronomy. But whatever they knew at that time, it was a particular moment, whatever happened at that time, they got fixated and it became the halacha. So he continues like the Chazon Ish, but the Chazon Ish believed that at the time they were right as well, but they actually, that they were right, but eventually since the teva changed, but the nature at the time was like that. So they paskened. Once they paskened, it remains like that for the next generations, even after Mashiach will come. But according to Rav Usha Weiss, he says that it's based on the knowledge. Whatever their knowledge was at the time, even though the knowledge was not 100% correct, but the Torah had to be stopped at the time had to be stopped in order to be fixated for the rest of the times. So this is Rav Usha Weiss, very nice chidush. Seems to be very logical. There is something to understand, because also Chazal never speak about things that cannot be seen are also to be considered as not existent in Chazal, and therefore this concept of whatever you can see, whatever you know, is the basis of your interpretation of the time. So it makes sense, and the Gemara actually, the Torah, the Halacha got fixated. He gives a different explanation. He also adds on that science is something that is in an exploration phase continuously. We always have to explore science, while the Torah is, after 2,000 years, has become what we call a transmission, and so there is a big difference between science and the Torah. The Torah got fixated at 2,000 years for the period at the end of the 2,000 years, and since then it started a period of what we call Masoros, transmission, while science is something that continuously has to explore, etc. Now, I would like to add something which I was a little bit surprised that Rav Usha Weiss did not mention, because he could have used a bit earlier than the Chazon Ish, he could have used something which is the Kesef Mishnah. The Kesef Mishnah in Hilchos Mamrim, Perik Beis, Halacha Aleph, has something very interesting, where he asked a question, according to the Rambam, every generation is allowed to disagree with the previous generation when it comes to the Midas Shator Nidreshes. So when it comes to logic of how to deduct an halacha from the Torah, all the generations are allowed to be cholek on the previous generation, because these are given to the human beings. and we of this generation are allowed to be choilek. That's what it says in the Posuk, the Posuk, the Shefet Asheyu Goyim Mahim. And that is the whole din of the Zok and Mamre, that even the Mamre that of the previous generations did not do it, but therefore this is how he sees that. Now, the Kesef Mishnah has something extremely interesting. So he asked the question: if that's the case, why don't the Amoroim actually are choilek on the Tanoim? Why does the Gemara says the Amorim are not allowed to be choilek on the Tanoim? According to the Rambam, they not only they are not allowed to, they have to be choilek if they believe that their knowledge and their logic is right. Then they have to go according to their own knowledge, and they have to be choilek on the Tanoim. And not only that, why don't we today are changing halachas based on our knowledge that we have today? And so says the Kesef Mishnah, it must say ve'efshar loima. It's a ve'efshar loima. It's very interesting because I would have thought that this is the basics of the Orthodox Judaism today. But the Kesef Mishnah uses an expression of ve'efshar loima. He says, shemiyoim chasimas hamishna kimu ve'kiblu shedoiros achronim lo yichleko al horishonim. That if the next generation would not be cholek on the previous generation, v'chein also gam b'chasimas hagomorah. So the Kesef Mishnah says that probably also this is the same reason why we are not cholek on the Gemara anymore, because shemiyom shenechtemo, from the day that Gemara was actually how do you call it, finished and written, if you want, or maybe not even before it was written, I don't know. But in so it's kind of this, even there is no difference. We are not allowed to be choilek on the Gemara for the simple reason that we accept it from ourselves. Klal Yisrael probably at a certain moment decided that since we're going to Golus and we are not going to be able to start and manage a Judaism in diaspora, the best thing is if we fixate a particular text and we take that text as what the Orthodox Judaism should look like. Similarly, also about the Shulchan Aruch, although when the Shulchan Aruch was printed with the Ramah, there was a lot of reaction against it, opposition from the Maharal, from his brother from the Maharal, terrible reaction, but also the Marshal. But eventually the Chasam Sofer also at late in his life agreed that the Shulchan Aruch should have been the centralized force, the text that is going to be the source from all Orthodox Judaism. And in order to fight the neologian and the reform, is that a Rov that wants to be ordained as a Rov, he must have kind of an assertion that he knows the Shulchan Aruch and that he will only keep what is written in the Shulchan Aruch, in order to avoid having all kind of problems of eventually the Rabbonim that we don't know whether they are a bit reform or they are really Orthodox. But this is the same thing what the Kesef Mishnah says, that after a certain time, when the Gemara was finalized, there was a chasima, therefore the Klal Yisrael accepted upon themselves not to be choilek anymore on the Gemara. And so therefore, even though, in other words, what we could say is that the Chukei HaTeva and the Chukei HaTorah, the Chukei HaTeva, which comes from the Elokim, and the Chukei HaTorah, which comes from Yud Kei Vov Kei, those two Chukei HaTorah and Chukei HaTeva, they have to be explored in nearly the same level, because they are both coming from Hashem. But what will happen is eventually that once the Gemara was written, and they stopped being aligned with each other. So during the period of formation of the Gemara, the Chukei HaTeva and the Chukei HaTorah were actually aligned. Whenever Teva advanced, then the Chukei HaTorah also advanced. When the Chukei HaTorah advanced, the Chukei HaTeva also advanced. So they were kind of in sync. But the moment that the Gemara the Bavli was written or finalized, it stopped. And although that the Chukei HaTeva actually continued to be developed, but the Chukei HaTorah stayed with what the Gemara was. The difference between what I say and what Rabbi Shevai says is that when Mashiach will come and we'll have a new Sanhedrin, the way I understand the Rambam is that the moment we will have a Sanhedrin again, if the human logic have changed, or if science have changed, the knowledge of science have changed, then of course we will change also the halacha, even on the Doraisa, says the Rambam. But basically, according to Rabbi Weiss, it's not like that. He bases himself on the 2,000 years, whatever was decided at the end of the 2,000 years, which corresponds with more or less the Mishnah and a bit of the Talmud, and so therefore this has been fixated as being the eternal truth. So it's quite a big impact, of course. What will happen when Mashiach will come, but in general, it's more or less the same explanation. So, just to summarize, we have three opinions on what science, when science disagrees. The Rambam holds that when science disagrees, we go according to the science of today, as long as it is clear science and not just an opinion about something. The Rashba says that we should never go according to the science, only according to the Chaza'l. Therefore, the halacha will never change. And the Tosfos says that the both are right. In other words, the Chaza'l are right, that because at that time this was how it used to be, and today the teva has changed, the nature has changed, and therefore that's why we don't see it anymore. But the halacha, the question now is if the halacha changes or not. We saw two opinions, some by the kinnim, how do you call it, the lice, whether you're allowed to kill it or not. This is a machlokas, but we pass on that we keep it how the Gemara says. And the Chaznish explains, because once it has been fixated after the 2,000 years, it's never going to change, even though that nature has changed, but the halacha doesn't change anymore. And how Rabbi Weiss explains it is because it's based on the knowledge that existed at that time, but the knowledge today has changed. It's not necessarily that the teva has changed, because not for everything can you explain with a change of nature. The world did not go from a flat kind of a pancake towards a ball. It doesn't make sense. Also, not the two tubes in the penis does not suddenly merge into one. It has to have some kind of a logic behind that. Mutation, yes, but this seems already quite a radical change. And so therefore we believe that whatever they knew at that time was the source of the formation and the fixation of the halacha. And what I'm saying is that based on the Kesef Mishnah, that once the Talmud Bavli was finalized, had the Klal Yisrael accept upon themselves that whatever is written in there is going to be the source from our halacha, not necessarily of our understanding of science, but it's the halacha, whatever the halacha was paskin, even if it is kipula or lechumra, whatever, we don't change. This is what the Chaza'l have taught us, and this is going to be the halacha as we do it today. But of course, since the knowledge have changed, when it comes to pikuach nefesh, one has to follow the doctors, one has to follow the science, but never to change a clear halacha that is defined by science. May we take a zoicha to the Gula Shlema, may Hashem send us Mashiach so that He can enlighten us on this difficult subject, and to hopefully, like the Rashba, that would have been beautiful, to prove us that whatever we believe today that is true was actually not true, and the Chaza'l were right. Let's hope for this scenario, but otherwise we can live with all the other scenarios as well. So we zoicha to the Gula Shlema, Meir of Yomeinu, Amen.